For years ago, my son vanished from my life, all because I fell for his best friend. Now he's back with shocking words that changed everything. His best friend. Even now, I struggle to say it out loud. I had Noah when I was 22. From the moment he was born, it was just the two of us against the world. His father, Chris, died when Noah was only 3. A car accident, quick, cruel, and life-altering. One day, I was a young mom with a partner by my side. The next, I was completely alone, trying to figure out how to raise a little boy while barely holding myself together. At first, I didn't think I could do it. I felt lost, overwhelmed, terrified. But when you have a child depending on you, you don't get the luxury of falling apart. You just find a way. And that's what I did. I built a life for Noah. I worked, saved, and made sure he had everything he needed. I sacrificed a lot. Dating, socializing, even my own happiness sometimes, but it didn't feel like a sacrifice. He was my reason for everything. Over the years, I did try to let people in. A couple of relationships here and there, but none of them lasted. It's hard to date when you're a single mom. Most people aren't looking to take on someone else's kid, and I wasn't willing to settle for someone who wasn't fully committed. Noah was always my priority, my anchor. By the time he was in high school, we had settled into our quiet little routine. He was reserved, thoughtful, and didn't have a big group of friends. He was a good kid, never gave me trouble, but sometimes I worried about how much he kept to himself. Then, during his senior year, Noah surprised me. He brought someone home, a boy named Adam. Adam wasn't what I expected. He wasn't loud or brash like I imagined teenage boys could be. He was polite, easygoing, and made an effort to talk to me about random things, books, movies, or what he wanted to study in college. He seemed like a good influence on Noah, and I was just happy to see Noah spending time with someone. Adam started coming over more and more, especially on weekends. I'd see them on the couch playing video games, laughing at something silly, or watching a movie together. Sometimes, Adam stayed for dinner, and those evenings were my favorite. We weren't a perfect family, but for a little while, it felt like there was more life in the house. As time went on, Adam and I got more comfortable with each other. We'd talk whenever he was around, sharing stories or laughing about something small. Eventually, we exchanged numbers, not for anything strange, just so I could reach him if Noah needed something. Then Adam started texting me. At first, it was just jokes or memes, innocent things. I didn't think much of it, and Noah didn't seem to notice or care. Looking back, though, I see how quickly Adam became part of our lives. How easily it happened, without me even realizing. It wasn't anything major, at least not at first. Just small moments like Adam staying for dinner, chatting with me while Noah was in his room, or helping with little things around the house. One time, he noticed the cabinet door in the kitchen was loose and grabbed a screwdriver to fix it without me even asking. Adam was always there in the background, but it felt normal. For so long, it had just been me and Noah, so having someone else around made the house feel less quiet, less lonely. He wasn't like most teenage boys I'd imagined. He had this easy confidence, but not in an arrogant way. He was mature for his age, thoughtful, and the kind of person who could carry a conversation without making it awkward. We didn't stumble over silences or fumble for topics like you might expect between an adult and a teenager. We talked about everything, books, movies, even little annoyances like bad drivers or a noisy neighbor. It was nice having someone who listened. But no matter how much Adam came around, my focus was always on Noah. He was in his final year of high school, and I wanted to make sure he had everything he needed to succeed. I'd spent years saving up for college, preparing for this big step in his life. Our relationship had its typical ups and downs, arguing over curfews or me nagging him about chores. But I thought we were in a good place. I thought I was doing enough. Then one weekend, Adam sent me a text. He wanted to meet for coffee. It caught me off guard. We'd never hung out outside of the house, so I couldn't understand why he wanted to see me without Noah. My first thought was that something might have happened. Maybe Noah was in trouble, or maybe Adam needed advice. But when I asked if everything was okay, Adam told me it wasn't about Noah. That answer only made me more curious. I agreed to meet him, but I was nervous the entire drive to the coffee shop. I kept running through possibilities in my mind, trying to guess what was so important that Adam needed to talk to me alone. When I got there, he was already sitting at a small table near the window, looking nervous. It wasn't like him at all. He usually carried himself with such ease. But now he was fidgeting with his phone, glancing around like he was bracing for something difficult. I sat down, and we exchanged pleasantries at first, though the tension in the air was unmistakable. After a while, I couldn't take the suspense anymore and asked what was going on. He took a deep breath, his shoulders stiffening, and then he told me. He had feelings for me. For a moment, I couldn't even process what he was saying. It felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's story. Adam? Noah's friend? The boy who spent weekends in my living room, laughing at video games and joking with my son? I didn't know what to say. I think he could tell I was caught off guard because he immediately started to explain, telling me he'd been holding it in for a while and just needed to get it off his chest. He said he understood if I didn't feel the same way, that he wasn't expecting anything from me. That made it harder. He wasn't being pushy or inappropriate. He was just honest. Part of me wanted to shut it down completely, to tell him this was inappropriate, impossible. But there was another part of me, a quieter part, the part that had spent years feeling unseen, that hesitated. It had been so long since anyone looked at me like that. Adam wasn't just some random boy. He was someone I trusted, someone who made me feel like more than just Noah's mom. But this wasn't just about me. I couldn't make any decision without considering how it would affect Noah. This was his best friend, someone who had become a big part of his life. I told Adam I needed time. I didn't commit to anything, but I also didn't shut him out. He seemed to understand. He didn't push or try to sway me. Instead, he left it in my hands, saying he'd wait for me to figure it out. That made it even harder to dismiss him. By the time I left the coffee shop, my thoughts were racing in circles. I kept replaying his words in my head, questioning myself. How had I missed the signs? Could I even consider something like this? Or was it doomed from the start? I didn't have answers, but I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. After that meeting with Adam, my mind was a mess. I didn't know what to think or even how to feel. It wasn't like I had men lining up to ask me out, but this was different. This was Noah's best friend. And no matter how kind, respectful, or sincere Adam was, there was this nagging feeling in my gut that this wasn't just a bad idea. It was the worst idea. But even with that voice in the back of my head, there was another part of me that couldn't help but be curious. Maybe even flattered. It had been years since anyone looked at me the way Adam did. For days, I went over it again and again in my mind. I thought about how it would affect Noah if he ever found out. Would he hate me? Would it ruin their friendship? And even if I could somehow keep it a secret, was any of this worth the risk? Adam was 18, fresh out of high school. I was his friend's mother. It felt like the kind of plot you'd see in a bad soap opera, the kind you cringe through because it's so ridiculous. Then Adam texted me again. It wasn't anything big, just a casual, "How's your day?" Like nothing had happened at all. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd changed his mind, that he was trying to pretend our conversation hadn't happened. But he hadn't. We kept texting, and before I knew it, the conversations were back to being easy and familiar like they always had been. Only now, there was something else beneath the surface. He told me about his plans for college, about the stress of figuring out what came next in his life. I told him about work, about how the house always felt too quiet when Noah wasn't home. We started joking around again, and it felt good. For the first time in years, I felt like more than just someone's mom. I felt like someone who mattered, like someone who could still be seen. I was cautious, though. I kept telling myself that nothing could happen, that I wouldn't let it go any further. Then Adam asked to meet up again. This time, it wasn't at some neutral place like a coffee shop. He asked me to come to his house. His parents were out of town, he said, so it would be quiet, private. I don't know why I agreed, but I did. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the loneliness that had crept up on me over the years, whispering that no one else would ever look at me like this again. I told Noah I was going out with friends, and then I drove to Adam's. When I arrived, he was already waiting outside. He looked nervous, shifting from one foot to the other, but there was something else in his expression, something resolute. We went inside and sat in the living room. At first, it felt normal like all the other times I'd chatted with him in my house. But the air between us felt heavier. He didn't bother with small talk this time. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about me, that he had feelings for me, that he didn't care about the age difference or the fact that I was Noah's mom. I tried to play it cool. I told him we had to be careful, that Noah could never. No. I told him this was complicated, risky, probably a mistake. But the more I talked, the more I felt myself getting pulled in. Adam was sweet. He was kind. And he made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. I don't know how it happened, but that night, we crossed a line I swore I'd never even approach. We slept together. It wasn't planned, and honestly, part of me regretted at the moment it was over. But there was another part of me, the part that had been lonely for so long, that didn't. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that we could leave it behind and move on like it never happened. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. After that night, things between Adam and me changed. We started seeing each other more often. It became this secret, something I hid from Noah at all costs. I told little lies, saying I was working late or out with friends just so I could spend time with Adam. At first, it was exhilarating. We had this private world, just the two of us. But as the weeks went on, the thrill started to wear off, and something else began to settle in. Adam wasn't just a high school kid with a crush anymore. Adam was becoming more than I ever thought he could be. It wasn't just attraction or curiosity anymore. He was starting to feel like someone I could truly confide in. We'd talk for hours, sharing pieces of ourselves that we'd never shared with anyone else. Stories about our pasts, dreams for the future, fears we barely admitted to ourselves. And without realizing it, I started falling for him. He became the highlight of my week. Every day, I found myself counting down the hours until I could see him again. And when we weren't together, we were texting constantly. But while Adam became a bigger part of my life, I didn't notice how much I was pulling away from Noah. It started small, missing one of his soccer games because I told myself there'd be another. Then it was skipping family dinners, claiming I had to work late, when really I was out with Adam. The worst part? I didn't feel as guilty as I should have. I told myself Noah was nearly an adult. He didn't need me around as much anymore. He was busy with school, friends, preparing for college. But now, looking back, I know that was just an excuse. I was so wrapped up in Adam that I couldn't see how much I was neglecting my own son. It all hit me on Noah's birthday. We had plans to go out for dinner, just the two of us, like we always did. I've been looking forward to it, or at least I told myself I had. But then Adam texted me, saying he needed to talk. I should have told him no. I should have put Noah first. But I didn't. I told Noah work was keeping me late, and that we'd celebrate another night. I'll never forget the look on his face when I said it. He didn't argue or complain. He just nodded, quiet and resigned, but there was something in his eyes that broke something inside me. And I still ignored it. I wanted to see Adam. We had a great night together, and before it was over, he told me he was falling for me. I didn't say it back. I couldn't. But deep down, I knew I felt the same way. When I got home, the house was silent. Noah was already asleep. I stood outside his room for a long time, staring at the closed door, thinking about what I'd done. I wanted to knock, to go in and apologize, to tell him the truth. But I didn't. Instead, I told myself that it was for the best, that I'd make it up to him later. The next morning, Noah didn't mention the missed dinner. He didn't ask where I'd been or why I wasn't home. He just got ready for school and left like nothing had happened. But things weren't the same. He was quieter, more distant. At first, I thought maybe it was just stress, school, college applications, the usual teenage pressures. But the longer it went on, the more I wondered if he was starting to figure things out. I kept telling myself there was no way he could know. How could he? But that nagging voice in the back of my mind kept growing louder. I knew I had to make a decision. I had two choices: end things with Adam or come clean to Noah. But I wasn't ready for either. So, Qley, I kept sneaking around. I kept telling myself that it would all work out somehow, even though deep down, I knew it wouldn't. After Noah's birthday, the distance between us grew. It wasn't just awkward silences at the dinner table or him spending more time in his room. He started feeling like a stranger in his own home. He'd come back from school, barely say a word, and lock himself away. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it, but I was too scared to confront it. And if I'm being honest, I didn't want to admit to myself that it had anything to do with Adam. I thought if I just stayed quiet, kept everything under wraps, things would eventually go back to normal. But life doesn't work that way, does it? Meanwhile, things with Adam were only getting more serious. I was spending more and more time with him, making excuses for why I couldn't be home or why I had to skip another one of Noah's soccer games. It was like I was living two lives, one with Adam and one with Noah, and I was failing at both. It felt like I was living two completely separate lives. When I was with Adam, there was a thrill I couldn't ignore, a sense of being alive that I hadn't felt in years. But the moment I stepped back into the house, the weight of guilt would press down on me, heavy and inescapable. One night, I came home late after seeing Adam. As I walked through the door, I noticed Noah sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone. He didn't look up when I entered. Normally, I would have asked about his day or tried to make small talk, but that night I didn't. I was too tired, exhausted from balancing this double life I'd created. Instead, I mumbled a quick goodnight and went straight to my room. That was the pattern we'd fallen into, quiet, tense, and strained. The tension felt like a thread pulled tight, ready to snap at any moment. I kept telling myself I could hold everything together if I just stayed careful, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. One weekend, Adam asked me to meet him at his place again. By that point, it had become such a routine that I didn't think twice. I used the same excuse I always did, telling Noah I was meeting friends, and left the house. The evening went well, as it always did. Being with Adam felt easy, like an escape from everything else. But when I got home that night, something felt off. Noah wasn't in his room. I searched the house, but he was nowhere to be found. A sick feeling crept into my stomach as I called his phone, only to have it go straight to voicemail. I spent hours pacing the living room, imagining every terrible possibility. Had something happened to him? Where could he be? Finally, just after 2 in the morning, the front door opened. Noah walked in, his clothes wrinkled and his knuckles bruised. He didn't say a word, didn't even look at me. When I asked him where he'd been, his response was short and cold. He said he'd been out. That was it. He walked past me without offering any explanation, heading straight to his room. When I tried to stop him, to ask what was going on, he slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a long time, stunned. Something was wrong. Seriously wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to dig deeper. Part of me was too scared to find out the truth. The next morning, Noah didn't bring up the night before. He didn't ask where I'd been or explain where he'd gone. He just went about his day as if nothing had happened, but I could feel the growing distance between us. Over the next few weeks, that distance only widened. Noah barely spoke to me. He avoided me whenever he could, locking himself in his room or leaving the house without a word. The silence wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unbearable. He wouldn't even look at me anymore, and I knew that something between us had shifted. And then everything fell apart. I was at work when I got a text from Adam. He said we needed to talk, and that no one knew. My stomach dropped. My hands started shaking so badly, I could barely hold the phone. How had Noah found out? What did he know? I left work early, unable to focus on anything else. The drive home felt like a blur, my mind racing with fear and dread. When I walked into the house, Noah was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV. But it was clear he wasn't really watching it. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating, like there was an invisible wall between us. I stood frozen in the doorway, unsure how to start. Finally, I forced myself to speak, to ask if we could talk. Noah didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the screen, refusing to acknowledge me. And when he finally did, his words were ice cold. He said he already knew. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that made it hard to think. I asked him what he meant, even though I already knew the answer. When he turned to look at me, his expression wasn't angry or furious like I'd expected. It was worse. It was disappointment. Noah said it so plainly, like it didn't even cost him anything to confront me. He just laid it out. He knew about me and Adam. His voice was flat, detached, as if he couldn't even summon the energy to be angry. I felt my stomach drop. I tried to speak, to explain, but he cut me off before I could even form the words. He didn't want to hear it. And honestly, what could I have said? I had been lying to him for months, sneaking around behind his back with his best friend. There was no defense. The guilt hit me like a truck. I tried to tell him it wasn't what it seemed, that I hadn't planned for this to happen, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Noah didn't want excuses. His voice shook as he reminded me of every time I'd lied, every time he'd asked where I was going, every moment he'd wanted to spend time with me, only to be pushed aside for Adam. I couldn't look him in the eye. I couldn't deny any of it. Everything he said was true. Then he said the words that broke something inside me. He told me he didn't even recognize me anymore, that I wasn't the mom he thought I was. I'd spent years trying to be a good mom, trying to put Noah first, and somewhere along the way I had failed. I whispered an apology, tears streaming down my face, but it didn't matter. It was too late. The damage had already been done. Noah didn't say another word. He grabbed his keys and left. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't know how. I stood there crying, feeling like the worst mother in the world. After he left, I called Adam, desperate for some kind of reassurance. But all he could say was that he was sorry. His voice sounded as lost as I felt. The next few days were unbearable. Noah barely came home, and when he did, it was like I didn't exist. He didn't look at me, didn't speak to me. He moved through the house like a ghost, and I couldn't. Blame him. I had destroyed everything. Then, about a week after the confrontation, Noah came home one evening and went straight to his room. At first, I thought it was just like any other night. But then I heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, of a suitcase being zipped up. My heart sank. I walked to his room and saw him packing. He didn't say anything, didn't even glance in my direction. I tried to talk to him, to tell him that we could work through this, that I was sorry for everything. But he wouldn't listen. Without looking up, he said he was leaving, that he was going to stay with his grandfather. Don't bother calling, he added before walking past me with his suitcase. And just like that, he was gone. The silence he left behind was overwhelming. I'd been used to him being quiet, used to him keeping to himself. But this was different. Now he was truly gone. Every time I walked past his room, I felt this stupid, desperate hope that he'd come back, that he'd change his mind and realize we could fix things. But deep down, I knew better. The look on his face when he left told me everything I needed to know. He had made up his mind, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I tried calling him, texting him, even reaching out to his grandfather. But his grandfather told me to give him space, to let Noah come to me when he was ready. How was I supposed to just sit and wait? The guilt was eating me alive. I kept replaying that last conversation in my head, thinking about all the things I could have said, all the ways I could have handled it better. But none of it mattered. He was gone, and I had no idea if or when he'd come back. Adam tried to be supportive through it all. He came over after work, sitting with me while I cried, trying to help me make sense of everything. But even that didn't feel right. Adam kept telling me that Noah just needed time, that eventually he'd come around. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but every time he said it, I felt this deep, sinking feeling in my stomach. What if Noah didn't come around? What if I'd messed up so badly that there was no fixing it? As the days turned into weeks, with no texts, no calls, no sign at all that Noah even cared I existed, that hope Adam tried to give me began to fade. I threw myself into work, into cleaning, into anything that could distract me from the emptiness Noah had left behind. But no matter how much I tried to keep myself busy, the silence in the house always dragged me back to the same place. Then, about 3 weeks after Noah left, I got a call from his grandfather. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought maybe Noah was with him and wanted to talk. But the second I heard his grandfather's voice, I knew it wasn't going to be good. He told me that he thought it would be best if I stopped trying to contact Noah for a while. His words felt like a punch, to the gut. I asked what he meant, even though I already knew. He's angry, his grandfather said. Really angry. He told me everything about you and Adam, and well, I think it's just going to take time. I couldn't speak. I'd always had a good relationship with Noah's grandparents, especially after John passed away. They'd always been supportive, kind. Hearing this, knowing that even they were telling me to back off, made it feel like I was losing everything. I tried to explain. My voice shook as I told him that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen, that I never wanted to hurt Noah. I know, he said gently, but sometimes things don't work out the way we plan. Just give him space. He'll come back when he's ready. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. All I wanted was to go back, to fix everything, to make things the way they used to be. But I knew that was impossible now. I had crossed the line, and there was no going back. Over the next few months, I tried to find some semblance of a new normal. Adam and I started spending more time together, but it wasn't the same. There was this weight hanging over us, this unspoken shadow of everything that had happened with Noah. Every time we were together, I could feel it. I could tell Adam felt it too, even if he didn't say anything. He kept trying to reassure me that things would be okay, but I wasn't so sure anymore. Doubt started to creep in. I wondered if I had been wrong about everything. Maybe I'd rushed into this relationship with Adam too quickly. Maybe I should have been more careful, more thoughtful about how it would affect Noah. But at the same time, I didn't want to regret being with Adam. He made me happy in a way I hadn't been in years. And wasn't I allowed to be happy too? No matter how many times I told myself that, though, the guilt never really went away. One afternoon, I was cleaning the house when I found one of Noah's old notebooks. It was from his senior year, filled with half-finished notes for school and little doodles he used to draw when he was bored. Seeing it felt like being hit by a wave. I sat down at the kitchen table and flipped through the pages, memories of Noah flooding back. The way he used to laugh at his own silly drawings. The way he'd leave these little notebooks scattered everywhere, full of ideas and dreams he never quite shared with me. Then, as I turned another page, I found a list he'd written. It looked like it was for a school assignment, neat and deliberate. It was a list of things Noah wanted to do after graduation. At the top was go to college, followed by things like get a job, travel, and at the very end, spend more time with Mom. That last one hit me like a punch to the chest. There I was, sitting in an empty house, consumed by guilt and regret, and the one thing he had wanted most, more time with me, was the very thing I had stolen from him. I sat there, staring at the list, the words blurring through the tears in my eyes. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. How had I missed this? How had I let things spiral so far out of control that my own son no longer wanted to speak to me? After that, I started writing letters to Noah. I knew he probably wouldn't read them, and even if he did, I didn't expect a response. But I didn't know what else to do. I needed to say all the things I hadn't said before. I needed to apologize. I needed to explain why I had made the choices I did, even though I knew they were wrong. I wrote to him every week. I poured my heart into those letters, telling him how much I missed him, how much I regretted not being there for him when he needed me most. I apologized over and over, even though I knew it wouldn't change anything. I didn't send them right away. For a long time, I wasn't sure if I ever would, but writing them helped in a way. It was like I was finally admitting to myself what I had done, finally facing the mess I had created. Adam tried to support me through it all, but even he could see how much I was struggling. I think he felt guilty too, like maybe if he hadn't pursued me, none of this would have happened. But we both knew that wasn't true. I had made my own choices, and now I had to live with them. The hardest part was not knowing if Noah would ever come back. Every day, I checked my phone, hoping for something, a text, a call, anything. But nothing came. And each day that passed, the distance between us felt wider, like we were drifting further and further apart. I didn't know how to fix it, and that was the worst part. For years, I had been the fixer in Noah's life. No matter what went wrong, I always found a way to make it better. But not this time. This time, I wasn't sure if I'd ever get my son back. As time went on, hope began to slip away. Every morning I'd wake up thinking, maybe today will be the day he calls or texts or something. But the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Then years. I tried to keep myself busy, throwing myself into work, into taking care of the house, and into my relationship with Adam. About a year after Noah left, Adam and I got married. We even had a little girl together, a beautiful, vibrant child who filled the house with laughter and energy. But no matter how happy those moments were, there was always an empty space, a hole where Noah used to be. It was like a piece of me was missing, and no matter what I did, I couldn't fill it. I kept writing to him, though. I never sent the letters, but I kept writing. It was the only way I felt connected to him, even if I knew he would never read them. In some small way, it helped to get the words out, even if no one ever saw them. Then one evening, completely out of nowhere, I got a text from Noah. I was cleaning up after dinner when my phone buzzed on the counter. At first, I didn't think much of it, probably just a notification or a spam message. But when I glanced at the screen and saw Noah's name, I froze. For a solid minute, I just stood there, staring at the message, afraid to move, afraid it might vanish like a mirage. The text was short and simple. Noah was going to be in town on Friday and wanted to meet. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, after years of silence, he wanted to see me. I must have read that message at least a dozen times before I managed to respond. My hands were shaking as I typed back, telling him of course, and asking him to let me know where and when. A few minutes later, he replied, suggesting a coffee shop downtown at noon. I agreed immediately, even though my heart was pounding. I didn't know what to expect. Was he coming to forgive me? To give me another chance? Or was this going to be a final goodbye? Some way to close the door on everything we'd been? I didn't have an answer, and the thought of seeing him again left me feeling both excited and terrified. The days leading up to Friday dragged on endlessly. I couldn't focus on anything. Not work, not the house, not even Max or our daughter. Show. Every scenario imaginable played out in my mind, each one more nerve-wracking than the last. Max noticed, of course. He asked if something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him. This wasn't about him. This was between me and Noah, and I needed to face it on my own. When Friday finally came, I showed up at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. I found a booth near the window and sat there fidgeting, my eyes darting to the door every time it opened. A small part of me thought he wouldn't show up, that he'd change his mind at the last minute and leave me sitting there alone. But right at noon, he walked in. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought he'd look completely different, but he didn't. He was older, taller, and carried himself with more confidence, but he was still Noah. He still had that same serious, thoughtful look in his eyes, like he was always deep in his own head. When he spotted me, he walked over without hesitation. My heart felt like it might explode. I stood up, instinctively wanting to hug him, but I held back. I didn't know how he'd react, and I didn't want to risk pushing him away. He nodded at me in greeting, his voice calm and measured when he spoke. It was too calm, like he was holding something back. I told myself it was good to see him, but my words felt small, hollow compared to the weight of everything I wanted to say. He sat down across from me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. I had spent years imagining this moment, thinking about what I would say, how I would apologize, how I would explain. But now that he was here, all of that vanished. Finally, I asked how he'd been. His response was short, detached. He mentioned work, life, the usual. I nodded, unsure of how to bridge the gap between us. There was so much I wanted to ask, so much I wanted to say, but I was afraid of overwhelming him, afraid of driving him away again. And then, after what felt like an eternity of silence, he broke it with a question I wasn't expecting. He said he wanted to understand how it had happened. For a moment, I was confused, but then he clarified, asking how things had started between me and Adam. I froze. I had thought this conversation would be about the past in general, about the ways I had hurt him and the distance that had grown between us. I hadn't expected him to go straight to the heart of it. I hesitated, fumbling for the right words, unsure of how much to say. I told him that it hadn't been planned, that it had just happened, that I had never meant for things to go the way they did. But I could tell my answer wasn't enough for him. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he pressed further. He wanted to know if all those times I had said I was working late or out with friends, I had really been with Adam. I felt a lump forming in my throat as I admitted the truth. Yes, I had lied to him. Yes, I had been with Adam. The guilt was suffocating, and all I could do was apologize. I told him how sorry I was, how I knew I had made a terrible mistake. But as the words left my mouth, I realized they weren't enough. Nothing I could say would ever be enough. Noah's expression didn't change, but the hurt in his eyes was unmistakable. He asked me if I had lied to him every time he had wanted to spend time with me. The question struck like a dagger. Hearing it said out loud made everything feel so much worse. I tried to apologize, my voice barely audible, tears welling up as I admitted my fault. But he looked away, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. He reminded me of all the moments I had missed. His birthday, his soccer games, all the times I should have been there for him, and instead, I had chosen Adam. The weight of his words crushed me. I admitted I had been wrong, that I had made a terrible mistake. My voice cracked under the strain of guilt, but Noah didn't respond. He stayed silent for a long time. While I sat there, wiping away the tears that wouldn't stop falling, I wanted so badly to reach out to him, to explain how much I regretted everything, but I knew deep down that it wouldn't matter. Finally, Noah looked back at me. His face was calm, composed even, but his tone was cold and final as he told me he hadn't come for an apology. He already knew everything. He didn't need me to explain. He had only come to hear it from me directly, to confirm what he already suspected. I nodded, unsure of how to respond, unsure if there was anything left to say. Then he said something that cut even deeper. He didn't have an issue with me dating someone. That was never the problem. The issue was that I hadn't even considered how my actions would affect him. He told me that I had prioritized my relationship with Adam over the one I had with him, and that was something he couldn't forgive. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. I tried to speak, tried to plead with him, but he raised a hand to stop me. Noah said he had made peace with it. He just wanted closure, but he didn't want me in his life anymore. He said he had moved on and thought it was time for me to do the same. The finality of his words hit me like a brick. I wanted to scream, to beg him to reconsider, but I knew it wouldn't matter. He had made up his mind, and nothing I said could change it. Noah stood up and told me he wished me the best. Then he walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me sitting there, feeling like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. For a long time, I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just sat there, staring blankly at the table, trying to process what had just happened. I had spent years imagining this moment, hoping it would be the start of healing, of reconnecting with my son. Instead, it had been the end, and all I had was myself to blame. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.